Thank you. Hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to meet such an interesting conference, especially if it concerns my favorite themes, the theme of Shakespeare and cinema also. I'll read my article about Shakespeare's Macbeth and its most distinctive screen adaptation, Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood. It will be kind of comparative analysis. The Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, about whom Steven Spielberg remarked, "the Shakespeare of our time in visual imagery," has adapted. It is customary to say adapted, although in the case of The Bat Sleep Well, the plot diverged so far from William Shakespeare's Hamlet that an uninformed viewer might not even realize that the film is influenced by the famous tragedy. Or devoted three films to Shakespearean themes: Throne of Blood, 1957, The Bat Sleep Well, 1960, and Run, 1985. All three films achieved exceptional success and received numerous awards. Run alone won more than 10 awards, including an Academy Award. Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, which the renowned American literary critic Harold Bloom called the most successful adaptation of Macbeth, is not merely a screen version of Shakespeare's famous and magnificent tragedy. There are already many adaptations of this, Shakespeare's darkest tragedy. Kurosawa creates his own Macbeth. The title of the film and the Japanese names of the characters already indicate this, yet the presence and subtleties of Kurosawa's artistic signature are more extensive. In creating his film, Kurosawa relies not on the tradition of Greek, European, or even Shakespearean theater, but instead makes extensive use of the distinctive dramatic techniques of Japanese Noh Theater. Even the characters are constructed in the likeness of the masks of that theater. Washidzu, Hieta mask, Asaji Sakumi, the witch Yamamba, Mickey's ghost, Chujo mask. In Noh Theater, which reached its final form in the mid-14th century and where professional actors began to perform, national song music and a variety of sound effects were of immense importance, forming an integral part of classical Japanese theater. Kurosawa himself, a highly complex task to transform one of the finest examples of European dramatic art, the tragedy Macbeth, which embodies the Renaissance worldview and represents the Shakespearean-European anthropocentric world, into a completely different cultural value system, that of the East, which is not anthropocentric but nature-centered. In Eastern culture, the unit of measure is neither man or God, but nature, or man within nature, or the animal world and man within it. This is vividly demonstrated in the film's opening shots, which depict nature. Shrouded in mist, barren hills and landscapes are shown where at first glance nothing exists. However, the words of the accompanying chant and the inscription on a wooden post suggest to the viewer that the spider's web castle once stood there. Incidentally, the Japanese title of the film is precisely Spider's Web Castle. The director's task is further complicated by the fact that he has transferred the story of 16th century Scottish generals and nobles to feudal Japan, where military power belonged to samurai and their lords. Let us return to the theme of nature and examine the abundance of movement characteristic of Kurosawa's cinema and his techniques of constructing motion. The hallmark of Kurosawa's films is precisely this complex technique of movement, while other directors place their primary emphasis on compositional balance. light and shadow, color nuances, central and vertical lines, as in painting, symmetry, the golden ratio of Leonardo da Vinci or other visual devices. Kurosawa focuses primarily on movement. His cinema is an endless chain of movements, separating and reconnecting, involving one or multiple characters simultaneously. Movement seems to be the director's language, the essence of his message, which in his films often replaces words and conveys more to the viewer than speech itself. Beyond the flexible and fluid movements of individual characters, such as combat, walking or running shots filmed from the front or back, or movements expressing heightened emotion, a sudden halt as a sign of anger, restless pacing, or crouching in psychological pain while holding one's head. Kurosawa's cinema also presents the movements of crowds, which can be both chaotic and highly organized. Another distinctive form of movement appears when a character standing before or surrounded by a crowd, a device perfected in Throne of Blood, triggers a movement response within the group through emotional expression. Similarly, the falling, throwing, shaking, or breaking of an object, beautifully executed in Run, can create a chain reaction of movement among those present. However, what interests us most here is the movement of nature and animals and their relationship with the characters, something absent from Shakespeare's work. Nature plays a major role in Kurosawa's films. It is through nature that the director presents perfect movement and the laws of dynamics. Nature inevitably responds to the approaching tragedy through heavy rain and thunder, which is also an essential component of Shakespearean theater, where natural forces respond to human wrongdoing, injustice, betrayal, and other crimes. In Shakespeare's dramas, nature manifests primarily through various natural phenomena: storm, thunder, lightning, rain, strange grey cloudiness, as in Macbeth, King Lear, Julius Caesar, The Tempest, or through supernatural occurrences: the witches in Macbeth, the ghost of Hamlet's father in Hamlet. Notably, in Hamlet, the ghost appears after the injustice, the murder, has occurred, whereas in Macbeth, the witches appear before the murder of King Duncan or through dreams. Romeo's unfulfilled dream in Romeo and Juliet, Caesar's prophetic dream in Julius Caesar, and so on. In Kurosawa's Macbeth, the dominant natural elements are mist and wind. They appear from the opening scene and accompany the viewer until the end of the film. Mist symbolizes the human inability to perceive true reality, as a result of which one becomes entangled in the web of evil, in the spider's web castle, referred to in the closing song as the castle of delusion, yielding to greed and the lust for power. Wind, on the other hand, symbolizes the transience of all material existence. Lacking awareness of this, man, for wind can disperse mist, is easily overtaken by evil, which clouds his reason and destroys all moral values, precisely what happens to Washidzu. That same mist separates man from nature and truth, leading him into a world of illusion and deception, poisoning his inner life and sowing seeds of evil within. In the forest of the spider's web castle, horses and are restless. Their neighing is periodically heard, accompanied by mysterious music. When the two generals stand before the witch hut, Washidzu remarks, "Look, how frightened the horses are." After their conversation, which the witch, when the generals once again mount their horses, they ride silently from some time beneath the mist, and in the absence of human speech, the viewer hears the rain, the galloping of the horses, and their neighing. In another episode, the director draws a visual boundary between Washidzu's inner world, enslaved by evil, and the external world of peace and freedom. This scene, which begins with peasants working in the fields and a horse wandering in Washizu's courtyard, introduces us for the first time to Washizu's wife, Asaji, Lady Macbeth. Motionless and expressionless, modeled on the Noh mask, she urges her husband toward treacherous murder, constructing an apparently irrefutable logical chain to justify the crime. The director creates a visual contrast between the horse moving freely in the sunlight outside and Asaji sitting in darkness deep within the room. Washizu, like a caged bird, moves back and forth between the walls, walking toward the open window and toward his wife, who also symbolizes the devil hidden within him. The immobility of the wife, her seemingly logical yet truth-obscuring speech, and the natural movement of the horse create another contrast. Evil, though, is static, rigid, and destructive, whereas natural movement is creative, renewing, and luminous. Another striking example of perfect movement appears in the scene before the banquet. When Mickey's son's horse becomes frightened, uncontrollable, and escapes after trampling soldiers. The horse's movements are perfect and contrast with the futile, clumsy movements of the soldiers who cannot capture it. The horse instinctively senses the trap set for its master. After the banquet, Mickey is treacherously murdered by Washizu's order, while his son miraculously escapes. Animals serve an important symbols in another scene when birds flood the royal palace, crashing into the walls as if they have lost their sense of space and, most importantly, their instinct for self-preservation. Those present laughter them. Yet the most important aspect is the conclusion drawn by Washizu, like the protagonist of Romeo and Juliet, who fails to interpret his dream correctly. Washizu is unable to distinguish a bad omen from a good one, and the birds appear to him as a favorable sign. Unlike Shakespeare, who begins Macbeth with the witches, Kurosawa opens his film with a messenger reporting on military developments. The first words concern war, that is reality, rather than the cryptic dialogue of supernatural beings. Kurosawa deliberately avoids beginning with witches, which would immediately emphasize the fictional nature of the narrative and distance the viewer from reality. On the contrary, his aim is to preserve realism, grounding the characters in reality and ensuring that the viewer remains connected to their psychological states. For this reason, he excludes Shakespearean pathos, ornate language, and emotional outbursts from the dialogue of his characters. This same intention underlines the transformation of Macbeth's first line. In Shakespeare's play, Macbeth enters with the enigmatic statement, "So full and fair a day I have not seen." In Kurosawa's version, Washizu expresses the same idea in a more everyday and accessible form. What is happening today? I have never seen such strange weather. In this scene, Kurosawa also adds an original episode. Washizu Macbeth and Miki Banko lose their way in the forest, despite knowing it well, and wander for 2 hours before encountering a supernatural force. Instead of three witches, they meet an old woman spinning thread and singing a Noha-style song about the inevitability of fate and the transience of existence. Unlike Shakespeare, Banko, who treats the witches with skepticism, Kurosawa's Washizu reacts with anger. The old woman, without weaving verbal traps, utters perhaps the most important line. Why are you angry when my prophecies are so favorable? Strange creatures are humans. They are terrified of seeing the depths of their own souls. This is very like to Jungian shadow, which is our that part of our persons that we do not want to be. This enrages Washizu and he draws his bow. Like Shakespeare's Macbeth, he senses the coming trial, yet instinctively resists it, though he cannot escape his fate. Kurosawa's film also omits the famous Shakespearean formula, fair is fall and fall is fair. Instead, the director shifts the center of gravity inward to the human soul. Evil is not external, but arises from within. The forest spirit, as the characters call the old woman, is merely a mirror of the soul, revealing hidden truths. Finally, Kurosawa radically transforms the ending. In Shakespeare's play, Malcolm's army disguises itself with branches and defeats Macbeth. Macduff beheads him. In Throne of Blood, however, Washizu's army does not fight the attacking forces, but turns against its own leader. Washizu is killed not by a rival, but by his own soldiers, who embody justice and clarity, shooting him with hundreds of arrows. Deprived of the opportunity for a warrior's duel, Washizu meets a far more humiliating end. Whereas Shakespeare's Macbeth dies fighting with sword in hand, Washizu dies in disgrace, unable even at the final moment to draw his sword from its sheath. Thank you.